Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Education and reads, why did he tell 3 News on 31 January 2011 that prices to attend early childhood education centres would not go up?
The Honourable Anne Tolley.
Mr Speaker, I understand this is referring to the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister was referring to the fact that early childhood centres have received a 2.4% cost adjustment, have high staff turnover and have had 8 months to adjust their businesses for the funding changes. So there is no reason for early childhood centres to put their prices up. The Prime Minister also went on to say that, quote, a lot of the sector is totally unaffected, end quote. This government is spending more on early childhood education than any other government. What we have done is reprioritised funding to target those children that need it most, rather than just doing what the unions want.
Before I call order, before I call Sue Moroney for a supplementary question, I want to warn her colleague, the Honourable Trevor Mallard, that a further interjection like the one he made that I heard so clearly will have him leave the chamber. He will not make that kind of interjection. Sue Moroney, supplementary question.
Supplementary to the Minister. Has he been informed by the Minister about Victoria Childcare?
Order. The member knows that the question has been transferred to the Minister of Education, and that is perfectly proper, where there is no particular reason for the question to be answered by any particular minister. So it's been transferred to the Minister of Education, and she should word her question, her supplementary question at least, recognising that fact, so that it does make some sense. Otherwise, the question risks making no sense. And if the minister simply says the question makes no sense, I'd have no choice but to rule it out of order. And so I invite the minister to word it in a way that makes sense. Sue Moroney.
To the Minister. Has the Minister informed the Prime Minister about Victoria Childcare in her own electorate of Gisborne, where fees went up $14 per child per week in October 2010, or the Central Otago Kindergarten Association that had to increase fees by $18 a week for 3-year-olds, or the Newlands Childcare Centre in Wellington, where fees have increased by $25 per week, or any of the many other centres where fees have had to increase because of her funding cuts?
The Honourable Anne Tolley.
Mr Speaker, I have repeatedly said in this House and outside that this government is spending more money on early childhood education than ever before, $1.4 billion we are spending this year on early childhood. I have also stated that these are individual businesses, and like many of the businesses throughout New Zealand, they make their own decisions. But the Prime Minister and I are disappointed if centres have taken the option to raise fees for parents.
Sue Moroney.
To the Minister. Why did the Prime Minister say that fees weren't going up?
The Honourable Anne Tolley.
Well, Mr Speaker, the Prime Minister didn't say that. He didn't say that. He said they didn't have to go up because we had given them 8 months' notice, 2.4% cost adjustment, and there was already high staff turnover. So there was no reason for those centres to put their prices up.
Sue Moroney.
Why did her government choose to spend $5.9 billion on tax cuts for the 10% wealthiest people in New Zealand in budget 2010 instead of keeping $400 million funding in place for early childhood education to stop these fee increases from happening?
The Honourable Anne Tolley.
Mr Speaker, it is very easy for that member to forget what her government did with early childhood education, which was increase spending by 3 times, without any commensurate increase in the number of children starting school who had received early childhood education. Now, that is not acceptable to this government, where in some areas 1 child in 5 is unable to attend early childhood education services, and so we have reprioritised funds to make sure that we address those issues where children are unable to attend early childhood education.
Alan Peachey.
Thank you,
Order.
Mr Speaker.
I've called Alan Peachey.
What reports has the Minister seen about commentary on ECE funding changes?
The Honourable Anne Tolley.
Mr Speaker, I'm going to read out an email, and I want to make sure that you understand this is not my language, this is the language in an email. Seen an email to the member who asked the question previously, Sue Moroney, from an ECE manager. It says, quote, "Dear Sue, I'm afraid you write a lot of CRAP. It does you and your party no credit. Labor brought in the so-called 20 free hours, but ignored industry advice as to how much money was needed and gave too little to cover costs. In the meantime, misleading public scaremongering, such as you are doing, is driving families away from childcare." End quote. That member who's asked the previous question needs to think about those children that are missing out on early childhood education, rather than how much money is going into the pockets of their NZEI mates.
Alan Peachey.
Thank you, Mr
Order.
Speaker.
Supplementary question, Alan Peachey.
Has the Minister seen any reports from ECE centres to parents regarding funding?
The Honourable Anne Tolley.
Yes, Mr Speaker, I've seen a recent note to parents from Crackerjack's preschool in the Waikato. It says, quote, there has been a lot of negative reporting about the funding changes for ECE centres. As stated last year, our fees will not be increasing in the foreseeable future, and we will not be cutting our services or reducing the quality of our care. Our two centres have actually benefited from the funding changes. Over the whole of New Zealand, this has been a good move and one that will lead to increased quality and funding for a larger number of centres. The loudest complaints are coming from centres that have accessed huge amounts of money for several years and have become accustomed to spending that amount. End quote.
Point of order. Point of order has been called.
Point of order is to ask you for your guidance. Does correspondence to a minister form part of official papers that the Minister is now quoting in the House, and if so, we'd request that she table those two documents, because on the first one she didn't identify the source of where it had come from. She just asserted these things had been said, and presumably they've been received. They're part of her official documents, and we'd like those tabled.
This is an interesting point of order. The issue's been raised whether correspondence received by a minister is an official document. I'll hear the Honourable Clayton Cosgrove on the issue.
I'd like you to deal with Standing Order 367, documents quoted by a minister. Whenever a minister quotes from a document relating to public affairs, a member on a point of order may require the minister to table the document. I'd argue, sir, that this is an email relating to public affairs in respect of her portfolio. She directly quoted from it, therefore she should table it.
Could the member, just before I hear the next member speak to the point, could the member identify the Speaker's ruling?
367.
Standing Order 367. And I'll hear the Honourable Simon Power on the matter.
Mr Speaker, in my short time in this House, my experience of the use of the standing order relates to official advice that has been provided by officials, or indeed to a document which could be sourced to an official source, not to correspondence to a minister.
I'll hear the Honourable Trevor Mallard, because I must confess that I am uncertain, because the standing order that's been quoted, of course, doesn't make the particular point that the Honourable Simon Power refers to, yet I am familiar with the accepted practice, but I'll hear the Honourable Trevor Mallard on the point.
Sir, I'm going to say that I'm uncertain as well, because I think it's the first time it's been tested that I can remember in this way. But, sir, I'd like to draw your attention to the Official Information Act. When we're trying to decide what is official, there is no doubt in my mind that this document is one which could be sought and obtained under the Official Information Act. And if we're trying, and as the Minister has released on many occasions, and no doubt you did, sir, too, when you were a Minister, correspondence under that Act. And so if we're trying to work out what's official and what's not, that could be a factor. Sir, I'll say, and I don't know if my colleagues will thank me very much, I'm not absolutely certain the standing order was meant to be used to capture this sort. But then again, Mr Speaker, I think that if the Minister has done the proper thing, and that is checked with the sender of the email that it could be used in the House, which of course we would all do before we have. At that point, sir, my view is it then becomes official if she has checked that properly and therefore should be tabled.
Speaking further, please, Mr. Speaker.
I'll hear the Deputy Leader of the House,
Thank you,
indeed,
Mr. Speaker.
the Honourable Simon Powell.
The point that the Honourable Trevor Mallard makes is an interesting one, but the difficulty with it taking that point to its logical extreme is that any note that a minister has that they may be reading from in question time, which, as the minister knows, can be the former minister knows, can be requested under the Official Information Act, would fall into that category, meaning that question time could easily descend into a farce if all notes that were available to ministers fell into that category. Yeah, no, it would. Trevor.
Order. That point. It's a very. I think I have enough information now to rule on the matter, and it was an interesting point of order raised, and I appreciate the member's contribution to it. I perhaps should have been a little more familiar with some of the previous speakers' rulings myself on the matter, but what was said about the traditional practice, I think, is supported by other speakers' rulings. If members look at speakers' rulings 1, 3, 6, 2 and 3, they cover what in this House has been considered to be an official document, which doesn't include letters to ministers, but specifically then speakers' ruling 1371, a letter written to a member by someone outside the House. That one covers particularly concerning a bill, is not an official document. But I also come back to 136, 2 and 3. An official document is a document connected with the government of the country, or a document which is passed between officers of the government and ministers, or between one officer and another. And clearly such an email does not meet that standard. I think it's an interesting issue that's been raised, but before I were to depart, I would not depart from those speakers' rulings without some consultation with members as to the wisdom of widening the current practice. And I think I therefore should rule that the Minister is not obliged to table those emails under the current speakers' rulings. But I fully accept it was an interesting point of order raised.
Further point of order, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Trevor Mallard,
I just want to say thank you. I think your ruling's right. It would be a bit dangerous.
I thank the Honourable Member. Question number 9, Shane Arden.